that is end-to-end encrypted, which means that only you can see your photos. Like we don't have access to any of your data. I'll get to enter in a bit. So like most of you here, I'm a self-taught programmer, and this thing is very real because this is exactly what happened when I met my wife's father for the first time. I did end up marrying her, so all is well that ends well. Aside means I've worked at a bunch of cool places. Some of them are now worth over $1 billion. I also spent almost a year working at Google in Zurich, Switzerland, and I didn't last long there. I mean, I just spent a couple of months and I quit because both the place and the company were a bit too slow and cold for my liking. So I quit and I came back home in 2020, right before COVID, to build a company around photos that has now become NT. And my return was obviously not well received by my parents because they had finally something to brag about, with their relatives, the quintessential middle class dream of their son settling down abroad and working at a mega corp. So I burst that bubble, and so since 2020 I've been building NT. And so this talk is about our journey as a bunch of programmers sitting in India, and how we have gone about building a company that's open source, that's a consumer brand, and without any venture backing, and how we're trying to do the whole thing in a profitable, sustainable way. And mostly about the mistakes you've made, in the hope that you guys will not make them when you guys start companies. And let's see, yeah. So when I came back home, the first thing to do was just, the obvious thing that, you fire up VS Code, you start writing code, and because you first build something that you can sell. And at that point, my idea of NT was a bit different. It was not really an encrypted cloud. It was like a device that you could keep at home, similar to an NAS, where you should automatically back up all of your photos from your devices. And the device should actually have the intelligence to, index them, to create categories out of them. And basically a private NAS, right? But something that you could actually give to your parents with very little maintenance, that doesn't require any engineering effort, and that can sit at your home. And it took me around 6 months to build the first version, and it was pretty simple. The box basically contained a Raspberry Pi, and we had Flutter apps that would automatically back up all of your photos to it. And the Raspberry Pi ran a Golang server which would just, do all the magic. And at the end of 6 months, I got to the point where I actually had to find my first customers. And so what I did was I went on Reddit. I scraped Reddit for folks who were looking for alternate to Google Photos over the last 2 years. And there were a few hundred. I picked out like the latest 100, and then I intelligently DM'd each one of those guys, asking that, hey guys, I've built this, would you guys be interested in checking this out? And the answer was like a very vehement no. And the reason was simple, because this was like an open source service that I was selling, and they were like, dude, you're a random guy on Reddit, like why would I buy hardware from you? I'll just take your server and open source it. And in hindsight, it's very obvious, right? And ideally I should have actually spoken to these guys first before writing a line of code. And that is what I did next, right? So I now had a product that worked. So what I did was I took the demo of that product, the video of the product, then I stuck it on a landing page with a header and a footer which just said that, hey guys, I'm building an encrypted cloud. Would you guys be interested? If yes, please subscribe. And I put that on Reddit and Hacker News, and then overnight I had over 1,000 subscribers. And then I realized that, okay, this is something that's worth building and that will possibly make sustainable revenue stream. And yeah, so 6 months into building a company, this was my first learning that you actually don't write code first, you actually go out there and sell. And for a programmer, this is counterintuitive, right? You're taught to talk less and ship more. Whereas while building a company, you do it the other way around. You actually find your customers first before writing a line of code. And this is very important if you're starting a company, because the first couple of months is like the honeymoon phase. Much like a relationship, you have a lot of energy, you have a lot of commitments, and it's important to direct all of this into productive areas. So then it took me another 6 months to actually build something which was what was promised, the encrypted cloud with clients for Android, iOS, web, desktop, which would automatically sync your data into an encrypted. And then it again brought me back to the same point, right? Finding the first paying customer for this. And I'm re-indexing on this because as programmers who are building a company, this is the only problem that you have to solve. Because building the ho jayega, right? I mean, we all breathe and eat code. So building is never going to be the crux of the problem. Marketing is, right? And to be honest, even right now, I still have it's not something I've mastered. But it's not very hard either, because mostly you're building something to solve your own problems. And for me, NT was my own problem, right? I didn't want my family to show their photos and Google or anybody else. So you know where people like you hang out. So then it's about hanging out in those same places and talking to them in a reasonable way. And for us, the first paying customer came out of emails, the folks who had subscribed 6 months ago. And this first dollar that you make is always very memorable as an entrepreneur, because it's like I still remember I was at my co-founder's place, we were having chai, and then we get an alert on Rod saying that somebody tried to pay and then it did not go through, right? And there was a lot of joy and panic at the same time, and the joy is very different from getting your first paycheck, because it's like do like somebody actually wants to use what we're building. And I hope some of you will actually get to experience this. It's very different, the joy, not the panic. And so then we went on to showcase the product and did it, and that went really well because people were already looking for this. And we went on to put it up on Hacker News, which went even better. And since then we've just been building. And see, Reddit and Hacker News are forums that you guys should hang out in if you're trying to build something, because these are an interesting bunch of people, right? I mean, they understand technology, they value freedom, and they actually have the energy to like back people who are trying to do something new, and back underdogs basically. And I mean, all of us sitting here, all of us are underdogs, right? And for the world to be a more balanced place, which is what all of us want, we are all back underdogs. So these are forums you guys should hang out in if you're building something. And so, I mean, throughout the journey, we've basically just focused on trying to actually make revenue, right? And there is a different way we could have played this, which is to actually get your first investment check. And that's a different way to build a company, right? And we did explore this. Like in 2021, we had applied to YC. And if you guys don't know YC, YC is like the largest tax rate in the world. And like they did get on a call with us, and in that 10-minute duration, they basically just wanted us to pivot to something that was enterprise focused, because they felt that consumer privacy was not an important theme. And this was a painful conversation for me to have, because I mean, I grew up looking up to YC, right? And they say you never meet your heroes. And here for 10 minutes, I had people, I really looked up to, telling me that whatever I was trying to do was pointless and not very pleasant, right? So then I moved on. Like over the last couple of years, I've spoken to, I think, close to 50, 60 VCs maybe, and I've understood that it's a very different way of building companies, because see, they're putting some amount of money in you, hoping for a 100x return, and they all have their fund cycles, and the sooner you actually return the money, the better it is for both parties. So if you're looking for acceleration, that's a great way to build something. And when you're looking at VCs also, it's how you go about it is like when you look at portfolios of each of these guys and you see where you actually fit in, and when you find a VC that might match your interest, you then look at their framework. Right? Because see, nobody really knows who's going to be a unicorn. They all have their own mental models, and now you can reverse engineer the mental models by looking at their portfolios. Then it's about crafting a narrative where your story fits that mental model and then pitching that, right? And especially if you're building an enterprise open source company, right, there are a lot of them. These are just some that popped off my head. If you ask ChatGPT, there's a much bigger list. But I mean, the point I'm trying to get across is that there is a lot of investments you can actually raise. There are a lot of companies in India which are open source. They've raised money and are doing really well. So that's another way to go about building a company. But if possible, I would recommend actually opening up the form on YC first, Y Combinator, and filling that up. Because as an engineer, they ask a lot of very hard questions about parts of building a company that are completely unrelated to engineering, and it's important for you to have clarity on how to actually go about it. So there is that. And if you're playing this game, just buy yourself a .ai domain. No, I'm serious. Like if you're playing game, you play it really well, right? So do get a AI domain and then go for it. Okay, for a FOSS conference, I've gone a bit too long about making money, and although I think it's very important, right, for there to be financial sense or financial incentives for whoever is behind the project to continue building it or to actually play the long-term game. And for us, see, when we started off, it was a completely FOSS project, right? And then we realized that if we target consumers who are self-hosting, they will really not pay us in money. So we took the hard call and we relaunched like 6 months later with the encrypted cloud that we'll only focus on customers who just want cloud storage. So we didn't open source a server, and that was a hard call to take. But what this meant was that only people who are looking for an encrypted alternative, right, and were willing to pay actually used us. So for the first couple of years, this was the only thing we focused on. And if you're wondering why we open source our apps, it's because see, in an encrypted landscape, the only way for you to know that for you to verify that our privacy guarantees hold is by knowing that we have an open source app which has been audited. And like if you guys haven't thought of this, like WhatsApp claiming that they're end-to-end encrypted is a sham, right? You guys have no idea what Zuckerberg is doing under the hood. And compare that to say Ente or Signal, where it's verifiable that the servers have their own knowledge. So yeah, so that's why we open source the apps. And I think last month is when we finally got to the edge of profitability, and which is when we realized, okay, now we can actually do the right thing and open source the server as well. And yeah, so we did. And this is actually the first month I'll be drawing a salary, so after 4 years, so yay. And yeah, so then comes the question, right, why do we open source? Because like we discussed, these are at least consumers who sell FOSS will not really pay us, and in most cases, like even as a user myself, right, if I'm having a really good day, I will go to GitHub and I'll create a well-crafted issue with reproducible steps. Otherwise, I'll just make a nuisance out of myself, right? I'll go on Reddit or Discord and just rant. So it takes a lot of effort and bandwidth from engineers to build a wholesome community around whatever it is that you are building. And the truth is that it's now that we have the bandwidth. And for us, one of the reasons is trust, right? It's like we now have a live, breathing source code out there. So it's far easier for you to trust us. There's nothing you're hiding, and just to be transparent. And for you to actually recommend us to somebody else, this makes that easier as well. And a more important angle that we're tackling is posterity, right? I mean, with a company like ND, there is a question of like, dude, will you guys be around 50 years from now? Because that's the whole point. You're clicking photos, right? I mean, most of you seem really young. So if you go back home and ask your parents why they print out albums, that's the only reason, right? They want to go back in time, look back at their memories. So we have to make sure that we are going to be around for the long run. And open sourcing a project is like a obvious way to make sure that the project actually outlives the people behind it. So this is a very strong angle to this. And like sometime back, one of the volunteers asked me to talk a bit about the open source projects that we're using under the hood. And that this is actually insane, like from the libraries we use for encrypting data, to running machine learning on devices, to painting pixels, and Kailash is not here, but his own list monk for sending out newsletters. And so yeah, I mean, we are very grateful that we're getting to leverage such cool open source technology to build something else that we hope is going to be equally cool. And so from a core value perspective and like who we are and how much we owe, it just made sense to do this. And interestingly enough, like the very next day we are again on front page of HN. And this was very heartwarming to see because it's interesting how honesty actually works on the internet and like restores your faith in humanity. But of course, not everything is sorted, right? I mean, not everything is rosy. For over the next couple of days, servers are hammered by DDoS attacks because I mean the thing with open source is there is no security and obscurity anymore. So we had some motivated attackers who were going into a source code, figuring out what are the maximum pain points they could cause. And I mean, thanks to Cloudflare for actually saving our ass for those 3 days. This lasted for 72 hours. This is just the beginning of it. And I mean, now I know what their core product is. I never understood why Cloudflare was $30 million, right? I mean, now I know. And so the other good thing that came out of this was that, like over 72 hours, while we didn't really sleep, our infrastructure matured quite a bit, right, to become more resilient and to actually be immune to such attacks. So in hindsight, this was actually an interesting challenge to have. And not every challenge is very interesting, right? I mean, some do take a toll on your mental health. And like for us, we've had that as well. Like some of them are unique challenges, right? Like if you guys notice, like there are very few FOSS companies from India that are consumer facing, and we are one of those guys. And even on a global level, right? If you can basically count them on your fingers. There is Mozilla, there is Signal, there is Mastodon, and there are not a lot of them. And we are positioning ourselves to be a very strong consumer brand, and we're building out of India. And we did touch upon this like earlier in one of the talks that India is a meme, like for a lot of wrong reasons as well, right? Whether you like it or not. So and the kind of people, consumers that we're trying to sell to are people like you and me, right? We don't inherently trust systems. We don't trust Google. We don't trust Apple. We definitely don't trust Meta, and all for the right reasons. And now I'm gonna go and talk to a consumer like this and say that, dude, like, why don't you give me your family's photos? And that's a huge ask. So initially when we started off, we had a very hard time dealing with the same community that we are actually trying to build stuff for, where they were coming at us with pitchforks because of who we are, and like where we're from. And this is very painful because when you're actually trying to do something what you believe is right for a set of people, and they kind of come back at you with pitchforks, it's not very pleasant. So we ended up moving the company to US. We are actually a US company now, and that doesn't really satisfy people who are racist, but it does signal to the rest that we're very serious about what we're doing, because I mean, moving company to the US with the resources that we had is not very easy, but we did do that, and it kind of signals that we are actually serious and we're in this for the long run. Okay, now talking of long runs, see, as programmers, we are a very impatient breed, right? We get instant gratification, like change the color code here, like corner radius there, and like hot refresh, and you immediately see the impact and gets that dopamine hit, right? And while you're building a company, especially something like Ente, you have to exist for multiple decades for the world to actually take you seriously. So as a programmer, there is a lot of unlearning that has had to happen and learning to just find joy in like the process of building it rather than outcomes, because I mean there are no outcomes to play for. And yeah, then there is this problem of capital, right? And this is not specific to Ente or FOSS, but if you're building from India, venture capital is a little harder because in US, VCs actually venture out more than Indians, right? So in India, venture capital is a little more disciplined. So if you have a very audacious goal, you're going to have a harder time raising money to convincing people, like that you kind of fit into mental models. But I mean, this is, I think we already discussed that this is not the only way to build a company. I mean, the fact that Frappe and Zerodha who are sponsoring this event, both of them are bootstrapped. So that signals that there are other ways to build as well. And then coming to consumer apps, this is an important thing, right? If you're a FOSS product, then you can't really sell them ads. So then the only way to make money is actually by getting them to pay, and consumers pay far less than enterprises. So yeah, just be mindful of that. So okay, so now the last couple of slides I'm just ranting, right? And which brings the point, like then why are we doing this? Why are we struggling? Because clearly money is not a motivator for the kind of folks who are working at Ente. There are far more deterministic ways to make money than by doing what we're doing. And so the problem is actually very interesting, right? I mean, if you guys think messages should be encrypted or email should be encrypted, the amount of data that lies in your photos is incredibly high. Like there is a whole adage of pictures speak 1,000 words, and with where computer vision is going right now, it's actually true. And the fact that there is nobody else doing this is ridiculous. And yeah, so this is a very impactful problem to solve, and that keeps you going, right? And from a product perspective as well, right, it's a very romantic thing to build, that there is photos, and so the expectations out of design are very high. And even as an engineering problem, if you guys think building Google Photos is hard, you should take a look at Ente, because now everything is end-to-end encrypted. So doing things on the edge is much harder. And, I mean, there is a lot of joy in solving hard problems, right? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And for me, this is the more interesting thing about people that I'm getting to build with. There are a handful of engineers I'm getting to work with, and even the people I'm building for, the community is very wholesome. They echo the same vibe, because that they are people like me, they understand what we're doing. So to build stuff, with the people you think are very smart. I mean, I'm the least smart engineer in the room, and that's a very reassuring feeling to have. So yeah, so when you get to build such stuff with such people, it's a very high energy environment to work in. And yeah, this is another very real meme, right? And actually building a company is very, very painful, right? But I think I'm kind of tending towards the left or right, it depends on how you look at it, right? That guy with the hood. But what I would like to get across is that if somebody like me can actually do something like this, which I believe is impactful. I mean, there's a lot of good to be done when you start a company, right? And you guys are like much smarter and younger, so there is a lot more good that you guys can do, and it's not that hard. It gets easier basically. So yeah, that's it. So one thing to take away would be that actually build stuff, right? And and build stuff that actually matters to you personally. And if you can't build a company, if you don't think that is your thing, figure out startups where you can actually contribute to and make meaningful contributions. And while applying to a startup, just don't go with the lead code profile. I don't know why people do that. Don't do that, right? If you have a GitHub, that's a green signal. And hang out with people who are a few steps ahead of your journey, because they actually have a lot of things to tell you, and there's a lot of stuff that you can actually copy paste, with your environment variables to actually make things slightly easier. And the fact that these guys are organizing this event here, I'm super grateful to the volunteers. Right? When I was in college, there was nothing of this sort. There was no direction as such. And now FOSS is a big thing in India, and there are so many events happening. It's really nice to leverage that. And be open, right? So this is like me preaching to the choir. And I'm not talking about just code and engineering, but just about who you are as people. Be authentic, be honest, and it usually just works. And yeah, that's all. Thanks, Yash.